All right, we're starting now a new chapter in Acts, Acts chapter 6. And this is a whole new subject, so I can see why those who divided up the book of Acts into chapter and verse started a new chapter here. We read in verse number 1. Now, at this time, while the disciples were increasing in number, and boy, were they ever, a complaint arose on the part of the Hellenistic Jews against the native Hebrews because their widows were being overlooked in the daily serving of food. Well, just to make the observation right off the bat here, there was a daily serving of food for widows in the early church. Why do you suppose that is? It's because Jesus emphasized it so much in his ministry, taking care of the poor. It was a part of his ministry. Money that they received was often distributed to the poor. And of course, it wasn't distributed to the lazy poor, those who were just sponging off of others, because it's a biblical principle. If any man will not work, neither let him eat. But James wrote, and we'll be reading the book of James and not too long from now, that this is pure and undefiled religion in the sight of our God and Father, to visit widows and orphans in their distress. Why did he specifically target widows and orphans? Because these are people who, are, for the most part, aren't able to earn their own living, and particularly, even more so back in that day, because of women's roles were different in society. Even younger widows had a hard time making it, and women lived at home with their parents and families until the time when they were married because they needed someone to take care of them. That doesn't mean they were sitting around. They were working around the household and so forth. The women kept very busy. There was a lot of work for women to do, but not the kind of paying stuff that maybe we see today in more modern culture. And so, but widows in particular, widows who are not able to work, should be looked after. And so we see that happening in the early church. It just became, a characteristic of what they did. Where'd they get the money to feed them? Well, we've already read about that. People were dispossessing, what they owned, and they were laying the proceeds at the apostles' feet, and they were being distributed to any who had need. And this is an example of some who had needs. They were widows. And were they making payments on their Florida condominiums for them? I know that would be impossible, but I'm just trying to emphasize that they were giving them the bare necessities. These were truly poor widows who were facing a hunger crisis, food insecurity, and so they're providing food for them. But for some reason, we're not told why, there's some neglect of the Hellenistic Jews as compared to the native Hebrew widows there. And so the complaint is brought before the apostles. All right, so I guess I should go a little bit further here and say, is your church characterized by doing anything for the poor, the truly poor? I'm not talking about standing out in the street with a sign saying, free food for anybody who wants it, and attracting a bunch of lazy bums, who just take advantage of your generosity and foolishness. I'm talking about helping truly poor people who are facing food insecurity, true widows, right? True orphans. And as I've told you before, it's hard to find really, really, truly needy people in the country in which I'm living in most Western nations, because we're enjoying so much abundance. And there's so many social services, and networks to take care of people. But so therefore, we often need to look outside of our boundaries to the rest of the world, where people are living on $1 a day, and it's tough for those people to make it themselves. And, the widows and the orphans really, really, really suffer. Okay, so get involved. And if your church is not involved, say to your pastor, well, this is you say we're a New Testament church, pastor. So, here's what they were doing in the New Testament. It was just a regular feature, caring for the poor. All right, so in verse 2, so the 12 summoned the congregation of the disciples and said, "It is not desirable for us to neglect the word of God in order to serve tables." And I don't know if they actually had been previously serving tables and they're realizing now, we need to get out of this. I think it's more likely that what they're saying is, look, we understand there's a problem here, there's a need, but if we start getting focused entirely on this, we're going to be neglecting the Word of God, so we need to do some delegation here. We need to get some organization here. We need to get some capable people overseeing this ministry. Okay, and so that's their plan. Therefore, brethren, select from among you 7 men of good reputation. Now, that tells you right there, probably they were feeding a lot of widows in Jerusalem. Hundreds, maybe even more, maybe thousands, But to get 7 men, that indicates this is more than just a one-person job. You're not just feeding a handful of widows. And also having 7 creates a higher degree of accountability. The more people who know what's happening with the money, the less likelihood there is that money is going to be embezzled, right? Right. And so that's a good principle when it comes to stewardship and the administration of gifts which people have entrusted to us, that more than one person needs to know what's happening with the money. And there needs to be a system of accountability. Never forget what Ronald Reagan said, trust but verify, which really is a nice way of saying don't trust. And, the reason that there are hidden cameras in banks is because they're trying to discourage people from being tempted to come in there and rob the bank. There's a never-ending, watch going on there that gives a disincentive for those who are thinking maybe they could get away with it. Okay, and we lock our doors and we do all kinds of things to prevent from happening what we don't want to happen. And having lots of people involved is important when it comes to being accountable to those who entrust money to you. Okay, now a lot of interesting principles here as we go on about the whole idea of the best way to care for the poor and the best way to be a steward of what God has entrusted to us. I really cannot wait next time to get deeply into this subject. Okay, so appreciate you so much for joining me this time. I'll see you next time. God bless you.
HeavenWord 7 is made possible by the financial support of viewers like you. Thank you.